What's going on, guys? It's Michael back again with another video today. Today I want to talk about something a little bit different. This is actually something called shadow work. I think a big part of my channel was trying to communicate with you guys certain techniques, certain ways that I applied things that I learned, not only just in medical school, but comprehensively in the fields or different fields of medicine and applied them to my life, which actually helped me out a lot. Today, primarily, I want to talk about something called shadow work. So shadow work, I put here the name Carl Jung. Some of you may know him, some of you may not know him. He was a pretty renowned psychiatrist, probably near almost 100 years ago, but he developed different techniques. He really looked analytically at the human mind as a reflection of their unconscious versus conscious. So let's start looking at what exactly is the shadow. So the way Carl Jung described the shadow was this kind of subconscious entity, the subconscious version of yourself, which was basically comprised of everything that you either tried to repress, certain traits about yourself that you don't like, that you replace with conscious decision making or conscious representation in your everyday life. So essentially, the subconscious is actually what is deep inside the mind, and the conscious is actually what we'd call the ideal self, the type of individual that we want to represent ourselves as, the person that we see ourselves in the, how could I say it? Actually, it's like the person that you see yourself being from your point of view, being the best version of yourself. So the one that's righteous, the one that's always, doing the right thing. But a lot of the times as individuals, we always try to deny the parts of us that maybe don't represent this fully, the parts of us that maybe are repressing certain emotions. The parts of us are disowning certain traits about ourselves, like selfishness, disagreeableness, and even there's unrecognized strengths that we sometimes hide. So sometimes people, they'll think that the fact that they like to endure leadership roles, they think that maybe it's bad, they're putting themselves out there too much. So then they suppress the shadow, which could be even providing something positive about themselves. In addition to that, we also have projection. A lot of the times, we typically, or individuals typically, project what they see about themselves onto other people. Whether, for example, that'd be that this person is super unkind, they don't care about anyone but themselves. But, there could be a possibility that you are the one that doesn't care about anyone but themselves, but you're projecting that idea onto someone else in order to fulfill your ideal self. So looking into it a little bit more, like I said, so Carl Jung believed that we had our shadow and we also had our ideal self. And he believed that the distress that individuals feel, like inner division, internal conflict, lack of wholeness, and almost like identity fragmentation, came from the lack of intertwining between individuals' shadow selves and their ideal self. So ideal self I have here, basically incongruence with the shadow. You have repressed emotions. So you have emotions that maybe you want to hide more. Maybe it's irritation. Maybe it is overall, maybe you're feeling a little more angry. So then we try to say to ourselves that I shouldn't feel this way. I should be, expressing the desired emotions, calmness, kindness, patience. This is what society, and this is what I believe is what I ideally should be, even though I might be feeling something else unconsciously. And after that, we have preferred traits. So discipline, honesty, humility. And then we can also have disowned traits. Disowned traits being competitiveness, laziness, selfishness, that aren't in congruence with the ideal self. And it goes so on and so forth. Like hidden insecurities, we have good persona qualities, moral, fairness, empathy. These are all different types of qualities that we see as ideal, the type of qualities that we should have. But most of the time, what we find, or what Carl Jung found, was that a lot of people were walking around with this shadow version of themselves. So a lot of people were walking around with, they felt the selfishness, they felt the lack of agreeableness, but they walked around typically trying to suppress the side of themselves without being actually aware that they possess these traits. And what he found was that when you had integration, right? So you had awareness, you began to look at yourself from a non-judgmental view and owning the contradictions. By the time you start doing that, you start bridging the gap between the two, ideal self and shadow. And then that results in you having this conflict resolution internally. So what Carl Jung believed was that you actually gained a greater self of wholeness once you began to integrate the both of these shadow and ideal selves. And the reason he found that was because it came also from majorly a point of self-acceptance. Once you started to accept certain traits of yourself that you basically express inherently, you begin to actually accept yourself. So once you accept yourself, you begin to also develop more inner peace. And at the same time, you become more empathetic and understanding of those around you, because you understand that others are operating also from unconscious imprints that present themselves in their everyday life. So back to what I was saying was that Carl Jung basically observed that individuals developed more stability and groundedness. They had reduced projection, authentic confidence, and that actually came from a sense of understanding oneself deeply, which then resulted in them being able to actually become the best version of themselves, because they weren't operating from who they thought they should be. They were integrating who they were completely, and then also observing how did that match with what they ideally thought of themselves. So in strictly trying to deny parts of yourself, you actually took the parts of yourself that you repressed and you turned them into your own strengths. So overall, the purpose of this was not to necessarily that shadow work was going to increase your happiness overall. It was that shadow work was going to increase the ability to obtain internal peace, to actually be able to understand yourself more and understand why you are operating or how you react to certain situations, which give you greater insight into yourself. Because once you know yourself fully, then you can empathize and understand other people and understand their perspectives on life as well, or understand their perspective of what they're going through in their lives as well. So what I found was actually, when we took this shadow work, understanding, for example, why we repress certain emotions about ourselves, and then how does that match with calmness, kindness, patience, like I mentioned here, desired emotions. So then you start asking yourselves questions, right? You start asking yourselves more questions to understand yourself. So you start to observe when someone makes a specific comment, when someone maybe behaves a certain way with you, why do you react more to one type of behavior than another type of behavior? Or why do you react more to one type of comment than another type of comment? And a lot of the times is that you are operating from an unconscious level. But once you start to see that, for example, you begin to understand your own self, you actually begin to know why you react a certain way. And that just overall gives you a better understanding of yourself. And I'd argue that when you have a better understanding of yourself, you can actually relate to others more, because you've already kind of done the work to understand yourself as a person. So to kind of move on a little bit more, so I talked about how shadows and the ideal self are two different versions of ourselves. The shadow is the one we're kind of pushing away. The ideal self is what we're trying to present to society, what we're trying to present every day. And the lack of basically intertwining both of them without integration, we actually do have conflict. So the conflict results in different things. It causes anxiety, emotional instability, shame, chronic tension, because we are constantly denying the actual part of ourselves which are integral to who we are, in exchange for what we think is supposed to be ideal. So a good example is, like, for example, the ideal self. When you take a group of people, you ask them, how many of you believe that it is the right thing to do to give a homeless person money when you see them on the street? Majority of people, I would argue, would be saying that they would think it is the right thing to do. Now, you take those same people and you put them in a position when they're not being watched, and let's say they come in contact with a homeless person on the street, then you would see actually if they would be giving the homeless person money or not. And most oftentimes, most people walk by without giving homeless people anything. So that comes down to their shadow selves. Maybe their shadow selves are maybe a little bit more selfish, maybe asking, why do I not, like, why should I give them money? Like, they should go get a job. But then they repress that part of themselves and they present themselves as the ideal self, the ideal being that, no, we should do that. That's the right thing to do, without actually understanding that their shadow is the one that's actually running the show. So it's not that I'm saying it's good or a bad thing. What I'm saying is that it's just an example for you to kind of get how your shadow plays a large role. But most of the time, when we're operating from the ideal self, we are aware of that shadow self, and that causes incongruency, and that can cause us to kind of have tension about ourselves, maybe feel shame. But once we accept that there's this side to us, we actually become more at peace, Carl Jung argued. We actually become more aware, and overall we develop more confidence. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I thought I'd run through it really quick. Big ways that you can kind of do some shadow work for your own self is kind of write down any repressed emotions you have, disowned traits, hidden insecurities, and work through them and understand, be non-judgmental towards yourself, and see the actual type of person you are. Because most of the time, especially in medicine, we're always spending a lot of time understanding others. We're always spending a lot of time understanding other people's lives. But if we actually take the time to dive into our own lives, to understand our own selves, I think that can actually allow us to better understand other people easily, or maybe at more of a in-depth level. And then at the same time, because we're so aware of ourselves, even the good and bad traits of ourselves, that makes us more grounded and overall more calm in our lives. So thanks for joining me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and take care.